Episode 2 just aired and Campaign 3 is already into full swing, so let's get talking about it. This was Critical Role's Halloween episode, and honestly, costumes were amazing this year, just dressing up as each other, and the impressions were so on point. The goofiness and the laughter really just made me thankful that they're all back at the same table. There is some discussion on whether they would do their Halloween costumes this year because it's episode 2 of their new campaign. But honestly, I think they chose the exact right costumes. They weren't too distracting, but still got us into the Halloween vibe. It was just great. Now let's talk about the combat with Lord Esteros, or just Lord E from now on. Laudna is a beast in combat. Marisha really built a very strong character to start out. Not only is her damage respectable due to both having Eldritch Blast and Hex, but also her defenses are nothing to scoff at. Taking Form of Dread from the Warlock gives temporary hit points and some other really nice benefits, but then Shield from the Sorcerer provides higher AC, and everything is just combining together. Oh, and I'm forgetting Spell Sniper, which Marisha talked about. Laudna is a problem in combat, and let me kind of break it down for you. With Spell Sniper, that Eldritch Blast is going to have even more range. Then we'll look at Shield, which is going to raise AC. Form of Dread is giving temporary hit points, and it also gives Laudna the ability to invoke Fear into creatures that she hits. And that fear means that they can't move closer. So essentially, Marisha is creating a character that is just not going to be able to be touched, essentially. Honestly, I'm just really impressed with Marisha's character in and outside of combat, and we'll talk more about Laudna's backstory later, but the one thing that Laudna can't do is make attacks of opportunity. As long as Marisha isn't trying to make melee attacks, I think Laudna is going to continue to be epic in this campaign. But do you know who else was great? Orym. I think Liam is having so much fun in combat. Not only is Orym doing so much damage, but those Battlemaster abilities are adding that complexity and the ability for Liam to protect his friends. And you know, I've said it before, but Liam's roleplay does not stop during combat, and I think that elevates the fighter class and the Battlemaster subclass that Orym is using. And speaking of roleplay to elevate characters, Bert is hilarious. Travis is obviously having a ton of fun and playing him perfectly. Additionally, the talent of the cast is on full display. Matt rolling with Travis's improv and the natural one was just an example of great DMing that I really appreciate. And then you can also tie in Ashley and Travis having great roleplay in the middle of combat, really drawing you in. I actually made a video about talking in combat that you can see right there, and honestly, the battle against Lord E was a perfect example about why you should always continue to roleplay in combat. And I want to touch on Matt's design with this encounter really quick, because Lord E was terrifying. Really got the idea that, yeah, he was an old adventurer. Now, it wasn't as terrifying as like the party was going to lose, but you understood that this guy could be a legitimate threat. Matt's descriptions of his fighting style really added a lot to the old orc fighting, and there's just a brutalness to Lord E that I just enjoyed a lot. I don't know why, maybe that says something about me, but just the way that he fights and is just a grinder, a brawler, it just drew me in, I guess. Specifically how he was knocking around Dorian and Laudna and just destroying anyone who got in his way. But now let's talk about Lord E's deal, because he offers the party the chance to work for him to help right the wrongs that are in Marquette. Not only does he talk about social struggles, but also rumors of darker things crawling up from deep inside the jungle, which honestly, it feels like that's going to play a big role later, and I enjoy the foreshadowing from Matt there. But really, the biggest foreshadowing is about the Ivory Syndicate. I mean, what a great name, by the way, the Ivory Syndicate. It's so thematic, and I'm glad that Dorian, I think, caught on that, oh, there are a ton of Loxodon, elephant folk that are around the city of Drusar, and they have ivory, and if they're engaging in the ivory trade, then that speaks to just the innate cruelty of the Ivory Syndicate. I love it. From the little bit that we learned about them this session, they feel like a fantasy version of Spectre from James Bond. No one really knows about them. They only congregate at certain areas during certain times. There's speculation that the Chandy Quorum, or at least some of the members, are working with the Syndicate, so we're kind of going back and touching on a thread from last campaign about corruption in the government, and you know, they Critical Role handled that topic very well, so I'll be interested to see it here potentially again, through a different lens, of course, as Campaign 3 feels extremely different from Campaign 2, but the Ivory Syndicate, from what I'm gathering, is going to be a big threat later on. I'm just waiting for the party to run afoul of a member of the Ivory Syndicate and then have to come to blows with this huge organization with apparently enough power to scare Lord E. And honestly, I don't know how to feel about Lord Esteros. There are two different ways that I think we can go with this. One has kind of a more Batman Beyond feel, where he's just a genuinely good guy who wants to help, but just can't do it anymore, or his enemies are so great that as soon as he steps out into the world, he'll be essentially cut down, and so he needs help from other would-be heroes who are rising up and wanting to do good in the world. And I think that's perfectly fine. If that is who we end up getting as this character, that's great. But there's a second option. And I think the second option is that Lord E does want to help, but has a shady and dark past. We don't know everything about this character, and he could be a secret villain eventually. We'll talk about the first quest a little bit more later on in this video, but there is definitely some suspicion there regarding Lord E. I mean, heck, the group isn't even supposed to mention him, which the reason that he gave makes sense, that if he started to get mentioned out in the world, then the party could come under threat. But also, that's a really good cover if you're actually a villain and someone who you're fighting against would know and say, oh, you're working for him? Like, he's done X, Y, and Z. Why are you working for him? The way Matt has set up Lord Esteros, though, I think it could go either way, and I'm just really interested to see how the domino falls. Or maybe he's somewhere in the middle. Maybe he is trying to do good, but does have a darker and shadier past. I don't really know if that's going to be the case though, because the feel I'm getting is that Matt is going back to more standard heroics, and I for one am happy about this if this is the case. After 3 years of gloom and gray in Campaign 2 with the Mighty Nine, I'm ready for some solidly moral characters. All of these characters from what we've seen so far do have a bit of morality to them. They do feel genuinely good at heart. Even Dark Witch Laudna or punk rocker Ashton all feel like they are genuinely good people, at least so far. Probably there will be things in their past that they've had to overcome, which could be a potential link to the backstory of Lord Esteros, but for right now, I think that they're all just trying to genuinely do some good. Life is hard enough, and I'm ready for some levity in this campaign, which it's providing so far. These feel like a group of characters that I can root for wholeheartedly because they are just trying to help. Now, these characters might have selfish reasons why they're doing things, but they do feel good at heart. I'm not saying that they are purely good and just trying to help all the people that they can yet. They're not full heroes, but I think that they are definitely all going to grow into that role. And now moving on to something really minor, but I love, we got the first whisper of this campaign, the first whisper in years, and Liam got the whisper. He was smiling the entire time. It looked like he was almost about to cry. And I was just so happy for Matt and Liam's to have that moment. It felt like old times again. Moving on to some information we learned as the party was discussing whether they should take up Lord E's deal, but Laudna has connections to the de Rolos officially. Pate de Rolo, her rat with a raven skull. We knew that there was probably going to be some connection, and I'm glad it came out early, but we don't know everything. Firstly, I would like to just mention really quick that Laudna puppeted around this rat, and I think that that connection to being a puppet master is not to go unnoticed. Now we find out that Laudna was there when the Briarwoods took over Whitestone, and that she was there when Vox Machina was being hunted for. However, Laudna plays off these events saying that she didn't really pay too much mind to it, that she left Whitestone, and honestly, I don't really buy that. I think that Laudna does have a greater role, a greater connection to Whitestone, or at least to some of the players that were big in Whitestone. Vox Machina, the Briarwoods, or the Raven Queen, for instance. What her exact connection is, that's going to be up for discovery throughout this campaign. But the important thing is that the Whitestone connection is there, and honestly, I would not put it past Matt in this campaign to bring us back to Whitestone. I'd bet the farm that there are large aspects of Laudna's backstory that reside in Whitestone, and sometimes you just gotta take a trip. It has been literal years since the last time we visited Whitestone, and I want to see what's changed there. But after the party has a conversation in the tavern, they go back, they accept Lord E's offer, and he gives them their first task. Dayal Hall is a privately funded learning center in the Core Spire. It's a symbol of opportunity in the city of Drusar, and it's dear to Lord E's heart. However, there have been thefts. Materials have begun to go missing, and Lord E wants the party to figure out where the material's going, who's responsible, and stop them if they can. It's a good, basic, open-ended quest, and honestly, I prefer Critical Role quests that have an aspect of mystery to them, allowing the cast to peel through the layers, question people, use their abilities, and find out what's really going on at the center of it all. I think Matt is incredible at weaving these narrative webs with multiple NPCs and then connecting them all together. So I'm glad that we're seeing the cast and Matt play to what I think are their strengths, and I'm really excited for this going forward. The party then heads to a textile warehouse where they begin their investigation of the matters for the rest of the session, essentially. And I'm not going to touch on everything that they do, but just a few things that really caught my eye as they were investigating. Firstly, I don't think people give Sam enough credit for just how fucking smart he is, because my god, he is great, especially when he's using spells. I'm glad that he's back to using a full caster class. Scanlan was incredible just because of the creativity Sam was able to use, and he's using that same thing with fresh cut grass. I'm specifically talking about his use of Detect Thoughts to not only try to read the minds of everyone there, but also to try to look for if there are any hidden people in that warehouse, which is a great idea. Next, we have to talk about Brumestone. It is the magical material that allowed cities to fly in the Age of Arcanum, looking at Aeor essentially. And then it is now being used for sky ships, allowing ships to sail across the skies. Fern, Aurum, and Dorian rode in on one at the beginning of this campaign. I think this speaks to a deeper lore connection and the possibility of learning just what the gods are doing on other continents in Exandria. Now, regarding the investigation, I think that the Brumestone could have two potential meanings. One, the textile warehouse is a front for Brumestone moving. It's an incredibly rare material, and if Lord E isn't all that he makes himself out to be, then I think that this would make a lot of sense, just having a cover operation for moving this very expensive, very rare material. And it would also make sense on just why he's paying the party so much to essentially stop the stealing of what? Just cotton? Burlap? Once again, if Lord E really does care that much, good for him, but also I can see the other side of this being sinister, which again, props to Matt for writing such a compelling character that we can see from both sides already, where every action he does can be interpreted two different ways. One, he is really just that benevolent, or two, there are just sinister motivations underneath everything. However, I think a second interpretation, which is an interpretation that whoever is stealing these materials is in close contact with the Brumestone, is probably more accurate. Once again, I think that Matt is trying to go for a more heroic campaign, and I think we are, in the end, supposed to trust Lord Esteros. He might have a little bit of a darker past, but I think he is probably genuinely good at heart. Now, coming into contact with people who would have Brumestone, well, that's probably higher ups within the city of Drusar or the Ivory Syndicate, which we might be running into really soon. Let's see, another note that I have here is that Fern is perfect. She makes me want to go back and watch Exandria Unlimited, and Matt's reactions to Ashley role-playing Fern are also chef's kiss. Incredible. Fern not knowing who to kill, for instance, that particular moment when the VOD is up, go back and look at it. Matt's face of shock and wonder and then his laughing afterward is awesome. Fern is just a little chaos devil, and I am all for it because it elevates any situation. I know that Fern isn't everyone's cup of tea, but at least for me, I think Ashley has found a character with this endless well of laughs. And when you look at Fern, you think that she's so sweet, but there's a chaoticness to her, maybe a little bit of selfishness. I won't say evil, but definitely a selfishness and a lack of understanding about society. Also, Fern and Bert's reactions are 100 out of 10. Just fantastic. I love how she is not afraid to kind of threaten people. Fern is going to just burn some people throughout this campaign who try and cross her, which makes sense because she is a wildfire druid. But also, as a DM, while I'm watching Fern, I would be so thankful to have this type of character in my party because Fern is an initiator, and I think every party needs one or two. Fern will get things moving, will try to jump in and change the situation. And honestly, this is just an endorsement of Ashley Johnson as a role player, but Fern just really helps to drive the story, the narrative, the character interactions along, and honestly, as a DM, I look for those type of players. Fern is that type of character that makes every other character in the party better and makes them shine. She is a wonderful addition to the group, and any group would be lucky to have her. And there's another character that any group would be lucky to have, but I'm not sure if that's really a good thing. Let's talk about Ashton, specifically that whatever the fuck subclass that he has, because as a DM, looking at this, I'm like, is Ashton a little broken right now? Is he a little too powerful? He was casting Pass Without Trace on top of everything else he's doing. I think he also seemed to cast Blur when he went 3D in that one moment. He does a ton of damage. What the fuck is this subclass? I want to know, what are these mechanics? Because Jesus Christ, it feels like Ashton can do a little bit of everything. And you know what, being overpowered isn't necessarily bad. In fact, when I'm DMing games, I tend to come at the mindset that if all my players are overpowered, then none of them are, because I can just balance it out later. But here's the thing, Ashton is on another level, it seems, from a lot of the other players. And the one downside of overpowering people, or I think the one time when it's not a good thing, is when one character is able to overshadow other characters, and I'm worried that might happen with Ashton. For instance, you have characters that can be a little bit more stealthy, like Aurum or Fern if she wild shapes, but then you have Ashton that can just cast Pass Without Trace and kind of step into that role. Now, it's helping the party, but also I think it could be infringing, but that's going to be up to the group. But from an outside perspective, I'm interested to see how Ashton works going forward, because he's really powerful. He's really, really powerful. Now, a part of that is just Taliesin knows what he's doing and knows how to play his characters really, really well. But again, that subclass with everything that it can do, man, I think that over time it might get nerfed a bit, or Matt will give out magic items or boons to other characters maybe to raise them up. Because for right now, I think that there is a danger that whenever a situation occurs, we can just think, Ashton's got it. Ashton will do something. Like in the combat with Lord E, that was the one point where I was like, as soon as Ashton started going, I kind of was under the assumption, alright, they got this. Like, no matter what Lord E does, no matter how many characters he's going to knock down, Ashton is going to output enough damage, he's going to do enough, he's going to pull something out of his hat that everything's going to be fine. And over time, that might not be great. So that's something that I'm hesitant about early on in this campaign. Now moving on to another interesting character, Imogen. And I think that we've kind of found out Imogen's subclass. I think that she is very clearly now a aberrant mind sorcerer. What that aberrant nature is very interesting. But she is more than just an aberrant mind sorcerer. That is 100% clear. There is some homebrew going on with Imogen. Now, not everything is homebrew. Obviously, she also has the telekinetic feat from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. That's how she has Mage Hand. That's how she can bonus action shove. But that weird, radial detect thoughts that she can do, that's homebrew. And I think that there will probably be more powers as time goes on, which I'm glad about. I use a lot of homebrew and special boons for my players. I think it adds a lot to the game. And I really like to see Matt stretch his creative wings and kind of go outside the regular bounds of 5e. Ashton gives me some pause, but really throughout his campaigns, Matt has done a really good job with his homebrew. And using that homebrew on his players more in this campaign, I think it's just going to add to the story rather than detract. And I have trust in Matt that everything is going to work out fine, and that he knows how to run his table. So again, I'm not worried, and I like that Imogen is stepping out from the regular bounds of 5e and has some new interesting features. I have no doubt that it's fun for Laura Bailey, and I know it's fun for me trying to suss out what exactly is going on, where these features come from, what they can actually do, trying to figure out the rules on the fly. It's a fun, creative mental exercise. And speaking of a mental exercise, what the fuck is Bertrand still doing here? Like, I love Bertrand Bell, but I thought he would be gone by now, to be honest. And I think he's going to be sticking around for longer than we all thought. I still do not believe that he's Travis's main character. I think we'll find that character soon enough. But yeah, like, we have Bertrand for a while. And it wouldn't be bad, but I am just a little concerned about some of the table dynamics there, because Travis is role-playing Bertrand as his cowardly self, but as the group is coming together, that's created a little bit of friction with the group in general. I mean, Bertrand got stabbed by Ashton, got a knife thrown at him, got threatened by Fern. And I think that the cast is friends, they know how to parse through that, but it's just something to keep in mind that as a player, when you have a character run counterproductive to the party, it's important for you to touch base and to make sure, yes, we're all still friends, we're just playing a game, but it's not something that I personally like as a DM or as a player, so I'm interested to see how they'll grow, because I haven't really met a player that likes to stay in that space. Travis is just a really nice guy. His characters are always trying to help people. I mean, he has that CEO role for the company, so I would be interested to see how long Bertrand's going to try to stick in that role, whether he'll try to be wrapped up more into the fold, what Travis will do with that role play in general, and how long Bertrand will stay around. No matter what, I like Bertrand Bell. He's funny. He makes me laugh every single session. I'm just kind of worried a little bit for Travis. I want to make sure that, you know, he's having fun with the character and he's having fun in the new campaign. I just know that PC bickering is something that I've had to struggle with a little bit in the past and find my own ways around and try to bridge those gaps, and I can see little bits of that in Bertrand and his relationship with the party, and I always feel like that's where D&D is a team game. You're trying to work together, and especially if you're friends, it's just this weird cognitive dissonance having to put you against your friend who you like, and afterward you're gonna sit around and chat with, but in that moment having to, you know, role play like not liking them or not appreciating them. They're actors, of course, so once again, I don't think it's a big problem, but it's just something that players and DMs should look out for. Maybe this is a little bit of a teaching time to say, hey, if you're making a character that's running counterproductive to the party, this is what you might encounter. If you're not willing to sign up for this, maybe try to go a different route, because this is the result if you have a character that doesn't help in combat or runs counterproductive to the party. There is going to be conflict and tension, and not every player wants that, and more specifically, not every new player can think ahead and understand, oh, this is probably going to happen. When will Bertrand split from the party? I don't know. Will he split from the party? Well, technically he already has, because the party is split. They've already split. It's session 2. All the rules are out the windows. And I'm excited for next week. We got a split party. We got a new campaign underway, a new quest. And hey, I'm ready for the next episode. But if you're looking for something to watch until then, I'd check out this video right here. YouTube thinks that you'll like it. And thank you to all the new people who have joined the channel recently. And thank you for entering the dungeon.